Canada is cracking and possibly collapsing, and our tariffs aren't helping much either. Stick around. I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. Hey everybody, Greg Barron, Professor of Real Estate. Thanks for joining me today, and we're going to talk about Canada and just what in the world's going on there and why is the administration picking on Canada. And moreover, what's going to happen if they do have 25% tariffs on all of the exported goods coming out of there? How's it going to affect the United States and what's going on in Canada right now? First off, let me read you a little poem I wrote, which kind of gives a backdrop of what I think is prophetically going to happen that I'm going to explain. I call this Canada is Cracking. Canada is cracking, deep in the red. Tariffs and taxes hang over its head. Inflation is roaring, the debt through the sky. No one can tell if the well's running dry. Trump built his wall, slammed shut the gate, left trade deals broken and fueled the debate. Lumber and steel took a hit in the fight. Jobs started fading like snow in the night. Interest rates climb, the banks hold their breath. Households are drowning in mountains of debt. Groceries skyrocket, the rents through the roof. Wages stay frozen, cold, stark, and aloof. Trudeau is packing, his reign at an end, no magic left for the budget to bend. The voters have spoken, they've had quite enough. The debt load is heavy, the road's looking quite rough. Can Ottawa fix it? Can someone step in? Or will the economy spin and then spin again? The cracks keep on spreading, the people despair. Canada's cracking, but does anyone care? Thank you, ChatGPT, for helping me write that poem. I could have never done that by myself. But it does kind of explain what I want to talk about today, kind of prophetically. Why is Trump picking on Canada? Well, basically, he said before, it's border security and it's fentanyl. But I think there's something a little bit deeper in the making that maybe is not coming out in public policy that we want to discuss. I don't have a big crystal ball that shows all of it because, let's face it, he never really shows his hand as a reason why. But that's all we're hearing about right now is Canada. Canada tariffs, 25% on oil, 25% on lumber, 25% on aluminum, 25% on everything right now. So why is this such a big arrow in his quiver? He stated that there's close to $200 billion in trade imbalance, but frankly, nobody can see where that's coming from because if you really look at the numbers in the trade deficit, you never get there. As a matter of fact, that's 3 or 4 times the amount that's usually publicized. So I don't know where this $200 billion is coming from. And if you do take the $200 billion, oil alone is $160 billion of that. So I guess one of the questions is, does he really just want to crush them into compliance so that they will become the 51st state? Who knows? Who knows anything that he does and why? We just know that he is beating the drum of the tariffs. And the next thing I want to talk about is really where is Canada right now and how vulnerable are they to any incremental increase in tariffs based upon the economy that they presently have. So let's talk about what the experts say that a simulation of 25% tariffs will do to the Canadian economy. The Bank of Canada actually did a simulation if 25% tariffs were imposed on the present economy and what would happen in this pebble in the pond effect. Now, the Bank of Canada has stated that a 25% tariff of those items that I had previously indicated would shrink the economy by as much as 6%. Now, all things being equal, 6% shrinkage in the Canadian economy is worse than the period between 2008 and 2012, or as we call it, the Great Recession. So 6% is an enormous blow to the Canadian economy. So the other things that would happen with this tariff naturally would be a decline in exports. The U.S. just simply buys less stuff from Canada. So if there's a decline in exports, if basically we buy less stuff, then basically you have lower production in Canada, which causes unemployment, which again, if you go back to the Bank of Canada's simulation, they're stating that even Ontario alone would lose over 500,000 jobs. This would be an enormous blow to the workforce in Canada. So what if they came back with counter tariffs to offset the tariffs that we were charging them when we get into a trade war? It's a big game of chicken. So these counter tariffs, if they were imposed, would produce a much harsher effect on Canadians than it would for the Americans. Why? Well, think about it. A larger portion of our exported product, like fruits and vegetables, autos, those kinds of items that move from the U.S. into Canada, where simply they don't have the manufacturing capabilities like we do, and some of the agricultural goods would mean much higher prices for Canadians. So if they come back with counter tariffs, it's just going to increase the cost for the Canadians even more, which would increase further inflation, and then that would increase further erosion of their purchasing power, which continues to squeeze the Canadian economy. So there's no great outcome for the Canadians in a trade war. They just simply can't survive. When you heard economists before, when Trudeau was going out of power, stating that these tariffs would bankrupt Canada, they were essentially right. A protracted trade war with the United States is untenable with the Canadians. They just can't win. So absolutely, if the U.S. wanted to, they would have Canadians over a barrel if they inflicted this trade war. Now, granted, we receive about 61% of our oil from the Alberta region, and that will make a big difference. We also have other items that's going to affect our industries here, particularly in the construction and development industry, like aluminum and steel. And of course, oil produces a lot of the product that we put into place to build things. Asphalt, among one thing, laminates and plastics and those sort of things. So there will be effect on us as well, but not nearly as significant as it will be on Canadians. So let's back up just a second and talk about some of the things that are happening with Canada right now. They have a mountain of debt just like the U.S. does. The only difference is their total GDP is a fraction of what the U.S. produces. Also, that you might not know, the Canadians don't enjoy the luxury of a long-term mortgage like those of us in the United States do. You know, we can get 30-year long-term mortgages, 25-year long-term fixed mortgages, 20-year fixed mortgages. In Canada, the housing market is tied to a 1, 3, and 5-year term commitment. It's unheard of, for the most part, to see a 10, 20, or 30-year mortgage. Well, think about that for a second. Most of the mortgages in Canada in the housing market are tied to a 1, 3, or 5 variable rate. Now, keep that in mind. And what you know if you've listened to this channel very long is the biggest problem that we have right now in the commercial real estate market is most of those rates are being reset that were very low when they originated them back in 2019, 2020, and 2021. They were sometimes in the 2 to 3% range, and now we're seeing them 6 and above. In Canada, right now, 60% of all mortgages will be renewed in the next 24 months. And that means rates from 3 or 4 years ago are now going to be almost double what they were back then. And 60% of those will see at least a 40% increase in their mortgage payments. Now let that sink in for just a second. 60% of all mortgages in Canada will be renewed in the next 24 months. And there is no real abatement of short-term rates for them right now because they've got all these pressures coming against them. Now, the Bank of Canada is going to be in a quandary. What do we do? Do we lower rates to stimulate, or do we raise rates to fight inflation? It's a balancing act. But just like the U.S., they had incremental rises in the short-term rates over the last 3 years, just like we did. And the Bank of Canada is not going to act very quickly, in my opinion, to just crush those rates back down again, so all these renewed rates will be at a lower reset. What the economists are saying right now is the 60% that are having their mortgages renewed or reset will experience at least a 40% increase in mortgage payments. That is phenomenal. That means there will be no more disposable income on the heels of potential inflation because of higher costs from tariffs. Already on the heels of low productivity and high government spending, Canada is really at a crossroads right now. So one of the questions that I'll leave you with is just what does it do to commercial real estate here in the United States? Does it have any effect on us? And I would submit to you that it actually does. We just got finished estimating about 100-unit apartment complex that's ready to come out of the ground. Our construction costs have risen yet another 15% in commodity pricing. Now, if we start to have a trade war, oil's going to be impacted, lumber's going to be impacted, steel and aluminum are going to be impacted. All those components go into new construction, which means that long-term rates right now are still not going down. If you looked at the Fed recently, he didn't lower rates. If you look at the 10-year Treasury, which most 30-year mortgages or long-term mortgages are indexed against, we're still seeing a real stubbornness because the long-term bond holders that basically want a premium for the use of their money are saying, we think inflation is here to stay for a while. I really don't anticipate long-term rates going down significantly until 2026. That means that along with this tariff, we're going to have incremental increases in construction costs in all those areas, which is not going to allow us to pencil out new projects in the future unless we got a tremendous amount of equity and very little debt to attach to it. So what does that mean for real estate investors? Well, my opinion is what we're going to see is a stubbornness to long-term rates, which means that all of those that continue to kick the can, now more and more are going to go into the gutter because rates just aren't going to go down. They're not going to be able to raise the equity and convince all of their investors to write a check just to come up to zero again. And a lot of them are going to continue to give their keys back. There's not going to be a lot of new construction starts because they won't pencil out. Rates aren't going down. In addition to that, costs are still going up. Insurance costs are still going up. We just had a 20% increase to property insurance. So what does that mean for the inventory that's out there right now? Well, basically what it means is the deals are going to be had on the existing properties that have been on the market for a while, which basically the older developers, investors can't afford to keep anymore. The valuations are going to go down, and we're going to have the opportunity to come in and hopefully purchase some of those and move the next wave back up. Now, why is the wave going to go back up again? Well, simply put, because there's not going to be an additional inventory on the market. We've still got an increasing demand for, say, housing. Single-family homes are going to be stubborn for a while. So if you're in the multifamily market, that means that your rent is or your occupancy is going to continue to rise, which means that there's going to be less inventory that comes on, which actually means would be a better outcome for those with a longer term investment look. I hope all this isn't very confusing to you, but ultimately step back and think about this for a second. Increased tariffs on Canada will incrementally increase commodity pricing, which will make construction costs go higher. Interest rates are not going down. There will be more product that is given back to banks and sold off market, which means, in addition, there will not be an additional construction that's robust for a while, which means occupancies should rise. If occupancies rise, that means that demand will be at a peak and there will be less inventory, which means rents will rise. I hope you get the juxtaposition of all the moving parts. So in one effect, for those that are in the business of developing new properties, it's going to be stubborn. For those of you looking for investment deals, because we're going to have increased occupancies and hopefully increased rent over the years, it's going to be a fairly good market to go into. For you Canadians, I'm sorry. It's going to be a rough road for you. One of my next videos is going to be talking about the amount of money that comes out of Canada into U.S. real estate market just because of the tax benefits, the longer term mortgages, and some of the benefits that we enjoy from our tax structure that Canada does not. So I hope I made sense of what the tariff is doing. I hope I made sense of the outcome for Canada. It's not good. And I hope you also understand that it's still a good time to look forward to good real estate deals coming on the market, even in the midst of all of this crap that's happening with tariffs and interest rate structures the way they are. You've just got to look for those silver linings and position yourself. Thank you for joining me today. And as always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Remember, educate so you can evaluate to ultimately execute to increase your own personal wealth. We'll see you soon.